evening. Welcome to Dead Air Live. My name is Ted Lagos, and tonight's issue is peace, the opposite of war. The Boston Globe, the day after the incident in New York, and I'll call it that, why do they hate us? They had distinguished writers commenting on the problems we're having with Afghanistan and with people from other parts of the world, some people. And that basically is the direction of this evening's show. But unlike coins, as an example, that have two sides and swords that can cut both ways, there are a number of different ways to look at the issues that we're discussing this evening. Our guests are very special. We have Eric Weltman to my left. He's with the Citizens for Participation in Political Action. And next to Eric is Valerie Costa. She's a junior at Boston University, and she is with Students United for Peace. And next to Valerie is Josh Feldman. He's a junior at Emerson College and with the Boston Campus Anti-War Coalition. Eric, let's start with you.
Sure.
What are the issues that we're looking at here? Why do they hate us?
Well, again, my name is Eric Weltman, and I'm with CPPAC, Citizens for Participation in Political Action. I'm the organizing director there. And I'd just like to state at the outset that the Massachusetts peace community shares the grief of all Americans and condemns the terrorist attacks of September 11th. I think that's very important to state at the outset as an initial context before we delve into some of the very important questions that you've raised and we will be raising this evening. Again, that the Massachusetts peace community, though we are very concerned with some of the, particularly the warmongering of the Bush administration, we do feel the same sorrow, the same anger, and the same frustration of all Americans. As to your question, why do they hate us? I mean, I think that we need to define who the they is first. I mean, I think there's, why does bin Laden hate us? There's the question, why does much of the Arab world, I wouldn't necessarily hate, but dislike us? And then why does the entire world community have some concerns about the U.S. world behavior? So I think it's important to define, who the they is first.
And we can see that some countries are on our side and others are putting themselves in conflict with us. But within all societies, within all groups, there are people within them, they may be small percentages, that are angry at America for the kind of relationships we're having with other countries. And within those countries that really are very angry and overtly hostile against America, we find within them that there are people that support us and wish us well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Valerie, how does this relate to the work you're doing?
Again, my name's Valerie Costa. I'm a junior at Boston University and international relations and history major. So I've been politically active throughout college, working on various issues from sweatshop, labor, and peace issues is actually something that I've never really delved into until September 11th. And I wanted to say right off the start that I myself and everybody here, we feel the same as Eric does, just feeling the pain and sorrow of what happened September 11th. But to go beyond that, I'm here today to represent Students Unite for Peace at Boston University, and also to give a viewpoint from the international relations and historical aspects of the United States involvement in the Middle East. So.
Josh, how about yourself? Could you make some comments on this subject?
Well, first, I am here representing the Boston Campus Anti-War Coalition, and like the other guests here tonight, we have wanted to make it very clear to the community that we also are incredibly sorry and mourn the deaths of the victims of September 11th. And one of the things that I think is very important that you kind of touched on but didn't say exactly is that our foreign relation policies as a nation are incredibly unbalanced. And one of the things that needs to begin in this process is a dialogue about what our role is in the world, and if we want to represent democracy thoroughly, what that means in terms of our foreign policy and in terms of with our interaction with Afghanistan.
Well, looking at where we are now, we've got some very serious issues and problems in America as a consequence. Beside the destruction of the towers in New York and the terrible loss of life, one of the issues facing us is the kind of hysteria that's moving through our culture. And from your own perspective, where would we like to be? Where would you like us to be? And how do we get from where we are now to where that position is?
That's a very good question. I'll take an initial cut at that. I mean, I think one of the important things to do is to define, what are our objectives and what are our goals. And I think, my organization, CP PACS, and I think speaking for many of the other organizations that we're working with, we share the goals of bringing the criminals to justice, bringing whoever was responsible for the September 11th attacks to justice, and we share the goals of preventing further violence and further terrorist attacks. And I think that once we define those goals, and there may be others, but those are the goals as we see them, once we define those goals, then I think we can start to move forward and say, okay, well, what are the things that we should be doing? And equally, if not more importantly, what are the things that we shouldn't be doing? Certainly, striking out blindly at our own citizens and residents against, Arab Americans, against Muslims, that's not going to help anything. I think that should be, more than apparent to all of us and all of your viewers. That's not going to help anything. Bombing Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, that's only going to, kill more innocent civilians. That's not going to help anything. I think it's important, again, once we define our objectives and our goals, we start to figure out, okay, what is it that we should be doing? And again, I think some of the measures that it seems like the Bush administration is considering, including, full-scale war, is not going to help meet our objectives. In fact, if anything, it's going to cause more tension, more violence, more retaliation, and kill more innocent people.
Interesting point. Valerie?
I believe a dialogue is what we should be engaging in right now. And as peace activists around the Boston community and in solidarity with peace activists around the world, we are trying to create a dialogue, because if you turn on your mainstream media, you turn on CBS or any of the stations, it's the same thing you see every night. And you don't hear about, you only hear a one-sided perspective of what is going on right now, the actions that our country may be taking, and you don't hear about alternative perspectives. And one glaring example, I'm just saying, in the Boston community is on September 20th, just Boston campus activists and a few other peace activists who had heard about this march we had sponsored. We had marched from Copley Square to Harvard Square on September 20th. Over 1,000 people, easy. And I had never been in anything like that in Boston. So many peace activists, and there was only a blurb on the evening news, and I had never seen anything like that before.
Josh, could you give us a minute?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to agree what's already been said. Both comments are extremely valid. The press element of our culture and media in general needs to drastically change if, as a society, we are going to address this issue. We have been presented with a very one-sided view, and the polling that's been done is directly reflective of that. If we want an opinion that is in fact reflective of the American vote for whatever we do to go forth democratically, then there needs to be more media coverage about the history of Afghanistan and America's foreign relation policy prior to this conflict. There needs to be a lot more press about what we're doing to this country even now, before we're in a combat situation. And for instance, the UN has withdrawn their aid as of now, and huge amounts of people are starving. And the kind of aid that the US is supplying is actually almost directly going to the hands of the Taliban, and a huge amount of people are starving in Afghanistan. And so, this is all really important information that just isn't making mainstream news right now. And so I would agree that we need to open a dialogue, and we need to hear all sides of this. we're all angry and we're all upset, but we also must realize that human life is human life, and that although this is touched close to us, terrorism has been affecting the world since the beginning of time, and it's something that we need to address proactively and not reactively.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to take a break right now. Thank you very much. Last Saturday, speaking of that, there was the demonstrations in Washington on racism, and it was actually called the Rally Against War and Racism. And I recorded some of it, and we're going to show a tape now of one of the young speakers. What's very exciting about this is her name is PETA LINDSAY, and she's a high school student. And she's with the School Without Walls in Washington, D.C. And this particular school is a kind of a fortified school because the students in the school are children of people that work at CIA and FBI and Defense Department, things like that. So let's look at that tape now.
I'm so glad to see you all today. My name is PETA LINDSAY, and I'm a School Without Walls high school student right here in D.C. I'm here to say that young people today have been labeled as many things. We are often called apathetic, materialistic, insensitive, and out of control. But looking at this plaza today, you can tell those words are meant for completely different species. Students are on their feet and searching for solutions. Much the way the Bush administration had promised, only our efforts are towards a different goal, peace, and any way, shape, or form that we can bring it to ourselves and the nation. In such a diverse environment as my high school, a school whose students are composed of families that both work at the Pentagon and immigrated here from the Middle East, what we understood was that sensitivity was called for on everyone's part. Though at first not everyone could be said to be in favor of peace both here and abroad, as this country moved closer and closer to war, attitudes began to change. Students began to seek out information about the Answer Rally, realizing that though we never agreed to this war, it will be fought with our blood. We're the ones that are going to be drafted this year. And some of us are afraid for our friends of color, for ourselves, be we Arab, Muslim, or unfortunate enough to resemble either in the eyes of racist hysteria. Others were afraid for their personal freedoms, and most just don't want to see any more death. And so we have drawn on the support of each other and the many groups that form the Answer Coalition, and we are now coming forward to voice our thoughts to the nation. We have been organizing and preparing for this rally and for rallies to come. And every student with a conscience and free thought will be here to say that we do not want this war.
Well, that was really exciting, and it really points up that there are a mix of forces at work in our culture, and some of these forces are being diminished in their capacity to express themselves. And we have, I thought I'd bring up as a next topic, as Eric mentioned, that there is a challenge of leadership. Could we examine that as a group?
Sure. I mean, I think that sort of going off of Josh's point earlier about the fact that we're only being presented with, really a narrow perspective or one view from the media. And I mean, I think that's a very, very valid point. I mean, we're not hearing the voices of opposition. We're not hearing the voices of student activists and progressive organizations like CP PACs and so forth, who are very much an active presence in the streets. We're not getting the coverage that we deserve, and we're not hearing that diversity of voices. But we're also not hearing that diversity of voices from our leaders, other leaders besides the Bush administration, particularly our congressional delegation, Senators Kennedy and Kerry, Congressman Capuano. I mean, what we're hearing from them is the need to, quote unquote, speak with one voice. Well, if that voice weren't that of President Bush, it might be one thing, but the voice that we're hearing from President Bush is a warmongering voice. It's a violent voice, and when that's the voice that is coming from the Bush administration, we feel that there's a definite need for different voices coming from our congressional leaders, again, particularly Senators Kennedy, Senator Kerry, Representative Capuano. We need to hear different voices from them. More thoughtful voices, saner voices, wiser voices, less violent voices.
Can I speak to that as well?
Yes,
I'd
Josh.
like to say that we're dealing with a cycle of violence here, which has existed for a long time. And in finding a way to come off that cycle of violence and create a peaceful international community, we need to get away from that voice, regardless of what you specifically believe should happen in reaction to the 11th. We need to see that this is not an incident alone, but a collective group of incidents, and that in order to deal with this proactively, we must encourage our senators and our congressmen to speak out against this. And one of the things that I thought I'd mention, which ties into that directly, is that tomorrow is a day which has been called to speak to your congressmen and senators about your opinions from the peace community. So I'd like to encourage anyone with an opinion, both peaceful and otherwise, to call their senators and make it clear that the perspective that's been presented by the media and by the Bush administration is not even close to representing the people.
That in the eyes of, I've been encountered just rallies at campus just by random people who say, how can you speak out against, the U.S.'s and Bush's, war? And I'll call it the war because it's being termed as a war by the mainstream media, so it really is. How can you speak out? How can you be a voice of dissent? And I'm thinking to myself, you're one of the people who's saying we need to go to war to preserve our freedom, preserve our democracy. How about our freedom at home? I mean, why is it wrong for me and you and all of us to stand on our campus and hold a sign that says we want peace? It's not, and especially because we're encouraging peace and not war.
And that, of course, also applies to the Arab community. And as was eloquently put by the high school speaker that spoke at the rally, we're not treating our citizens with freedom at this point. And, that's one of the first things that needs to be addressed, is that, we risk coming into an age of McCarthyism, where perhaps, once again, we're taking away rights of people who are simply speaking in the name of democracy. You cannot have a democracy if you have a one-sided view, both from the media and from our representatives.
And if we're all speaking with one voice, I mean, it's almost Orwellian. Really, it's like something out of 1984, the notion that we should all be speaking with one voice, especially, again, if it's the voice of George Bush, who has been a voice of warmongering and of violence. And I mean, our concern is that, again, if our goals are to prevent further violence, attacking Afghanistan, if anything, is going to cause more instability in the region. It could lead to fundamentalists taking over Pakistan, which, as many of you know, is a nuclear power. So it seems like that the path that Bush is taking us on is a very unsafe one. And I think that all Americans should be concerned about that, and all Americans should hear about that. And that's why we need, in addition to folks like us being in the streets, we need our congressional leaders, Senator Kenney, Senator Kerry, Congressman Capuano, talking about and raising those concerns in a public and a visible way.
The criticism, and I should point out for the audience that I have a telephone number here if you'd like to call in. This is a call-in segment, and you can dial 617-628-9876, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. And looking at the mix of forces that at work, I wanted to maybe make a quick drawing here. Could you get me on channel 3, please? Camera 3, please. Thank you. And that is that one of the problems that we see in some cultures, and Afghanistan is one that seems to be in this direction, is that you have a society that is organized, maybe not the way they like to, but they try to get people to be of one mind. And this is what they all have to practice and live the same way. And these civilizations, cultures aren't as successful. They have trouble farming. They're not as productive. They don't have industries. Their largest industry is growing poppies for drugs. And when you come to a country like the United States, where you have a lot of different views, then you have a lot of different heads. People think differently in America. And we cooperate with one another. We're one culture. We have one economy. And this is a kind of a way to look at the differences between the two cultures. So, and there's going to be naturally conflict like this. But when we talk about the mix of forces at work in America, we're talking about this. And maybe some of our callers, audience could call in and give us some reference points of how they, where they feel they are in this mix of Americans. And can you describe some things, some characteristics or understandings that people might have in America and that you could represent them now? Not necessarily talking directly about your specific issues or point of view, but what are some of the other point of views in America that might be affecting it? Can you stretch yourself a little? I'll start it off then, and by saying veterans as an example, military veterans. I happen to be a disabled military veteran. And, you know, I'm concerned with sending our soldiers overseas and putting them in combat because the ones, 50,000 people were poisoned at Desert Storm. And we have the Agent Orange problem with hundreds of thousands of veterans that were poisoned in Vietnam. We have Korea as an example. And the VA, the GAO recently reported that the VA has become a haven for doctors with histories of malpractice. And for the veterans that came out with injuries, we have a veteran that lost a leg in St. Louis in World War II. He still has not received benefits. Wow. And this, again, talk about racism. He happens to be African American. And these are the kinds of problems. So there are other voices out there. There are other reasons. Can you identify any other people that might have an interest?
I mean, I'll mention that, I mean, some of the reaction that we get from people of in the general public is, oh, do you think that we should just, you know, let bin Laden go? You know, shouldn't we bring him to justice? And my answer is yes. And so, I mean, that's why I emphasize and state at the outset that we do think the criminals should be brought to justice. Those who are responsible for murdering, you know, thousands and thousands of Americans, they should be brought to justice without question. They should be captured, they should be prosecuted, and they should be punished. But the question again is how do we go about doing that? How do we go about bringing about justice? And again, I would emphasize the course that we appear to be on, which is one of war. That is not the path to justice. Bombing Kabul, invading Afghanistan, I mean, not only would it likely be another Vietnam, I mean, that's what the Russians tried invading Afghanistan in 1979. I mean, they got out of there 10 years later. You know, they'd been hurt. To say the least. So war is not the path to justice. War is not the way to bring bin Laden or whoever is responsible for those attacks. War is not the way to bring about justice. And so that's, but again, we do empathize with those people, the vast majority of Americans who want justice. We want justice as well.
I think you had mentioned off camera earlier that you were also associated with the Quakers and people that have a different interest in peace, not necessarily in this particular issue, that these conflicts shouldn't be resolved with guns, with armament.
I mean, we are, I should mention, my organization, CP PAX, is a member of a very large coalition of about 20 or so organizations that does include the Quaker group, American Friends Service Committee, as well as some Palestinian groups, some Jewish groups. It's a very student groups as well. So it is a very diverse and very strong and growing coalition.
Well, I have a surprise for you before we continue, and that is that earlier there was in the first World Trade Tower bombing, that was the truck explosion. Somerville Producers Group, Dead Air Live, had Noam Chomsky on, and we have a film clip from that show. We're going to show that now. So let's roll the tape, please. Noam Chomsky.
One of the biggest events of the first 100 days, it's affected a lot of other things, is the World Trade Center bombing. How do you see that? At first I thought it was just an NBC News rehearsal that got a little bit out of hand. How do you see that? What ramifications do you think that?
Well, there is, first of all, the question. I mean, let's assume for the sake of the discussion that the people that they've finger to the right people.
And if that's the case, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to blow up the World Trade Center.
Well, you know, there's a lot of very strange things about that explosion.
That's a little too...
for one thing, there's been some interesting discussion about this in the Israeli press, the Hebrew press in Israel, who've raised some obvious questions. I mean, you know, the people who carried out the bombing look as if they wanted to be caught. I mean, both the method of bombing, the trails that they left behind, I mean, coming back a couple of times to pick up
rental car,
money for $100 for a rental car. I mean, the connections to the connections abroad and so on and so forth. And they've pointed out plausibly that there's only two possible interpretations. One is that it was just an unbelievably incompetent group of people. I mean, I mean, even from the kind of bomb that they picked.
The gang that couldn't blow up straight,
It's just, so that's one possibility, just unimaginable incompetence. The other possibility is that they were infiltrated by a very professional outfit who wanted them to expose, who had a purpose. And there are some things you can think about.
On a grassy knoll.
Well, you know, I mean, it's a group of people that would not be very hard to infiltrate.
Well, how do you think this plays out? I mean, right here in Somerville, now they're talking about which I don't think it means much that this is a quote-unquote sanctuary city, except as a gesture. It says, you know, we're not going to harass immigrants in this town. But now they're talking about rescinding that. The city council is entertaining that idea, and I think it's...
we should have, I mean, let's continue to assume that what the FBI says is correct, and I think it probably is. One of the interesting things that developed in the World Trade bombing thing was a letter that was, you know, given front page at times, you know, from a group that claimed to be responsible, and which some regard as authentic. I mean,
they used Arabic numbers in it. So.
I mean, there's some questions about it. But let's assume it to be authentic. I mean, in my opinion, it's probably authentic. But it's interesting to read it. I mean, if we paid attention to what it said, honestly, we might learn something. So, for example, the core part of their letter said that the American people should question the role of their government in carrying out or supporting terrorism throughout the world. And if the American people don't question that and do something about it, they too may be subject to terrorism. Well, you know, those are words that we should listen to, because in fact they had a point. The U.S. is one of the major terrorist states in the world.
Right.
And there are plenty of people around the world who are, you know, who have suffered from U.S.-run terrorism and care about it. People here may not care about it, but the victims do. And they're all over the world.
And if you don't have the price of a ticket to Baghdad, you can go look at the World Trade Center.
It's not, I mean, all through the Middle East, Lebanon, Lebanon, for example, has been a major target of U.S., direct U.S. or else U.S.-supported terror. Central America and the Caribbean have been targeted for U.S. terror operations that go beyond anything that, you know, Libya or Iran could even dream of. There are, in fact, these people were in fact correct. The terrorist operations around the world can often be traced right back to Washington. In fact, the World Trade Center bombing itself is not an uninteresting example. The people who were charged with having carried it out, or their intellectual leaders, have pretty good CIA credentials. I mean, they were part of the CIA-funded operation in Afghanistan, which, I mean, I think it had an element of legitimacy. I mean, I think it makes sense to help people resisting foreign invasion. However, the people that they picked out, you know, the people that the CIA did not pick out, you know, secular nationalists to support. It picked out radical fundamentalist fanatics. One of them, particularly Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who was the main, you know, the main beneficiary of CIA support, has been just tearing the country apart. He's been shelling Kabul, you know, killing thousands of people, driving out hundreds of thousands after the political settlement. Now, these people were all associated with that group, with probably the most radical, fanatic Islamic fundamentalist group in the world, amply funded by the United States and Saudi Arabia. Well, yeah, trail happened to blow back to New York, if you can believe the FBI. But it's only one example of CIA-supported, of U.S.-supported terrorism throughout the world. Now, these are the press commentary on the World Trade Center bombing kept, you know, you had things like the United States we always thought we were voyeurs
right.
in the world of terrorism. It's something out there, you know. Now we're feeling terror, senseless logic, as if we had nothing to do with it. We have a lot to do with it, and we should be honest enough to face that.
And as if that one.
Well, welcome back. We are very fortunate this evening to have gotten a call from Michael Alpert, and he's a writer with Z Magazine. He's an activist, has some very important views on these issues. Good evening, Michael. Good evening, Michael. Michael. Michael.
Yes, hi.
Hi, how are you? My name's Ted Lagosse, and we have some very interesting discussions going on at the studio. I want to thank you for calling, and we finished up with the point that war is not the path to justice.
You're talking to me, I can't hear you. I can hear only 1 out of every 10 words.
Okay, I'll speak slowly, and that is the subject.
There's a technical problem. I'm hearing 1 word, then 10 not, then 1. It's not volume, something else.
Okay. Well, we won't carry...
That's better. Now you're talking.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
We've been having a very interesting discussion here, Michael, and we finished up with the point that war is not the path to justice. Could you give us your opinions on that subject?
Well, it's not just war. It's piling calamity on top of calamity. One doesn't want to answer attacks on a civilian population, which is what happened on September 11th, a barbaric kind of activity, to be sure, with attacks on a civilian population. So we don't want to be a vigilante, operate outside international law, attack civilians as our answer to precisely that kind of behavior. Or at least it seems to me that we shouldn't want to. But it isn't just war in the sense of military war. A British journalist today wrote an essay. It was titled Genocide or Peace. What the person meant was, and argued I think quite compellingly, was that you can't simultaneously redress the disaster that's about to happen in Afghanistan, that is the potential starvation of literally 1 million, or the UN says maybe as many as 7.5 million people, while you're simultaneously trying to wage war. It's just not possible. The borders closed, the roads cleared, the sky's full of missiles. You can't deliver food. It can't happen. And the people will starve. So it's necessary not only to not bomb the country, it's necessary to open the borders and to deal with the human calamity. Otherwise, we're engaged in a terrorist action. It's just of larger proportions and with a different delivery system.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that strikes me is the direction that the country seems to be going in is that if we put ourselves in direct conflict in Afghanistan, we're going to be creating what's called collateral damage. These are people that happen to be in proximity of terrorists. Yeah. Yet, if we shot a terrorist in London, as an example, if there were a group of 5 in a room, why, we wouldn't shoot through the window to get them with a helicopter, because that would be murder.
Well, we didn't bomb Montana in order to kill the people who had been friends with McVeigh, because that would be barbarism.
Yeah.
And the same thing holds here. But it's more than just shooting again. A few days into the events, the United States told Pakistan to cut off food aid to Afghanistan. Now, anybody can understand what that means. When the UN is claiming that there's a potential starvation crisis, if you cut food off, you're adding to the crisis. That's not going to starve the Taliban. It's not going to starve bin Laden. It's going to starve the population. The motive may well be to have the population so demoralized, so angry, so irate that the government can't stand. But that's terrorism. That's attacking the civilian population to gain a political end. It's also what we're doing in Iraq. Mm-hmm. That's what the embargo is in Iraq. Mm-hmm. So over a period of roughly a decade, all foreign objective accounts from the UN to aid agencies, everything, says about 1 million people have been killed in Iraq by the embargo. Well, that's attacking a civilian population in order to attain a political end, which is the definition of terrorism. So we don't want to be doing that. I think the right course is to use international law to demonstrate guilt, to prosecute, and that's the right course with respect to bin Laden. It's the right course with respect to the terrorist you mentioned who maybe used a car bomb or something like that. And it would be the right course with respect to, let's say, Madeleine Albright, who, when asked on American TV, what do you feel about the 500,000 dead children as a result of, dead Iraqi children as a result of the policy that you support, the embargo? This was by an American journalist on American television. She didn't say we didn't do that. She said the price was worth it. The price was worth it. 500,000 dead Iraqi children in order to further entrench Saddam Hussein in his position in Iraq. That quote went all over the Mideast. People have a hard time understanding why some people around the world have bad feelings toward the U.S. government. They shouldn't. They should be able to understand if they have these facts at their disposal.
It's one of the topics that we had earlier was on the mix of forces at work in our culture. And I had been asking people for questions for this show, and I'm going to read one that was given to me a few days ago.
Sure.
And the woman said, I'm concerned that our generals are now authorized to shoot down a hijacked plane. How do we get around this kind of a problem? How would you define it and describe an answer to that question?
Well, I'm not totally sure what the question is. If the question is if somebody hijacks a plane and is flying it at a building, is it warranted to shoot it down? My answer would be yes. It would be warranted in order to save thousands of lives, perhaps tens of thousands of lives. Yes, those are horrible calculuses, I guess you could say.
Exactly.
But I don't think that's the main question. Imagine somebody in that woman's town, the lady who asked the question, imagine somebody in her town in a post office went what's called going postal. Right. The person went home, got a gun, and shot their workmates, which happens in the United States on occasion. And suppose the person managed to get out of the post office and get back into the community. So the question would arise what to do. And the answer isn't that the people in the post office who are still alive go out and buy machine guns, go into the person's community and shoot it up. The answer isn't that they starve the people there. The answer is that they go through legal channels, that the person is demonstrated to be guilty and prosecuted. But what's more, they look to see what are the sources, what are the causes that create this odd phenomenon of going postal, this barbaric, inhumane, gross behavior which causes us to be depressed and outraged. What causes it, and how can we diminish those causes? So I don't think the real question is, although it should be addressed, what do you do in a plane when somebody tries to take over? Rather, the question is, what has to change in international relations so that bin Ladens and others who would engage in terrorism, including, say, people like Madeleine Albright, are unable to do so, don't have support for doing so, realize they can accomplish nothing by doing so, and so on? Those are the real questions to ask.
You know, it reminds me of the concept of forfeiture, what you're saying. You mentioned the postal syndrome. And the concept of forfeiture, why, if you park at a hydrant and the officer comes along, you violated a rule and they give you a ticket and you're penalized. And when people are victimized in the workplace, because a lot of times these postal workers, right or wrongly, they feel they have an issue. And it can't be
stress, and a sensible response is to try and reduce the stress.
Well, we're looking now at parallel concepts of forfeiture. First, the people in other parts of the world coming here and killing over 5,000 people, and now our country starting to get into a position where we're going to double that factor for their injuries.
Well, no, wait, let's be clear about something. Let's say that the tally is actually 6,000 people for the World Trade Center in Washington, which it seems to be. If we ask, what has the United States done to Iraq over the period of the last decade, the answer is that 6,000 people a month, every month, for the entire period, month in and month out, have died. So when we ask, why would it be that some people, and what was the response when asked about this? When bin Laden, who obviously is a thug, was asked about the World Trade Center bombing, he deplored it. He said that killing civilians was horrible, that there was no justification for the behavior. Now, he may well be lying. It may well be that evidence will show that he was involved. That's certainly a plausible assumption, but that's what he said. When Madeleine Albright was asked about starving 500,000 Iraqi children to death, She said the price is worth it. That's rather stark. That's why they don't like us. Where the us isn't you or me and your listeners, it's the U.S. government.
Yeah. Well, there was following the incident in New York, the Boston Globe ran a special section with dignitaries writing in, and the subject for that was, why do they hate us? Yeah. Did you happen to see that on the 13th?
I didn't. I've heard the kinds of things that people say. It's very convenient. People say they hate us because of our culture. They hate us because of our wealth. They hate us because of this and that. Of course, it's nonsense. Everybody knows that people all over the world love Hollywood movies. People all over the world love American sports. People all over the world aspire to live a life of relative ease and comfort, which some people, not all people by any means, in the United States do live. That's not what people are upset by. Yeah. What people are upset by is policies that cause them to suffer. What people are upset by is racking poverty, or governments that are oppressive and that are supported by the U.S. Look, one of the things that people are upset by is the Taliban, and the Taliban is an American creation.
Yep.
It's not as if the Taliban has tremendous support, it's just powerful. It isn't as if bin Laden has tremendous support as a sort of an individual or something. He's just powerful. But these people didn't come from no place. They were trained by the United States. They were armed by the United States. Yep. That's one of the kinds of just grievances that people have. I want to be clear about something. Just grievances don't justify what happened on September 11th. Just like stress wouldn't justify a postal worker killing his workmates. There's no justification for that kind of behavior. That kind of behavior is barbaric. It's horrendous. But it does help us understand why it happens, and it does set an agenda for us if we want to prevent it from happening in the future.
Well, the interesting thing now that we seem to be sacrificing our own democratic process in America in the way the dialogue and the hysteria is building. Could you comment on that?
The only thing I would say is I wouldn't use the word sacrificing. The people who are trying to reduce the amount of democracy, the amount of civil liberties, and the amount of freedoms that exist in the United States aren't doing it with a frown on their face. Those people are doing it because they want to do it, and they're doing it because it's their agenda. That is to say, let me just try and make a point here that's a larger point about what's going on. And it's a point that's hard to hear and hard to even bear. It's so, but nonetheless, I think it's valid. And that is that the U.S. administration has an agenda, and the agenda is, in some sense, to replace what was called the Cold War with what's called the War on Terrorism. The war on terrorism, for those who are interested, is not new. During the Reagan administration, it was the focal point of U.S. foreign policy. It's simply returning again. The purpose of this war is to have something like the Cold War, a mass campaign that involves a tremendous amount of rhetoric and a tremendous amount of concern, fear, hope, etc., but doesn't involve much shooting. The Cold War involved almost no shooting with the Soviet Union. So the idea is to have something which can be used to do what? Well, to do exactly what the Bush administration is trying to do right now, to scare and cajole the public into accepting things that it would not otherwise accept. Capital gains tax elimination. In other words, giving more money to the rich. What has that got to do with what's going on? But that's what the Republicans are proposing. Diminishing civil liberties, making it less easy to be critical of injustices. What does that have to do with what's going on? Precisely the opposite is what's needed, but it's the Republican agenda. People need to be aware, I think, that the same kind of person, these things are harsh, but the world is harsh. Well, the same kind of person, Madeleine Albright, who can say what she said about 500,000 Iraqi children, can also have an agenda and try and pursue that agenda, as callous as that may be, in an environment and a climate of mourning. And that's what's going on. I mean, the stark example of it, of course, is, what's his name? Was it Falwell? I guess it was Falwell.
Right.
But anyway, one of those right-wing evangelist types who got up the day after the events and said the purpose, the cause of this is feminism, or the cause of this is gays, or the cause of this is you know, too much rock and roll, or all the things that they said. I mean, it was incredible that somebody could have the gall to get up and say these and try and use this catastrophe in such a way
to promote their own agenda. You're right. Well, it is. It's been called a war on terrorism, and tonight's show, by the way, Michael, is named Peace, the opposite of war. And we're going to return now to the studio. Thank you very much for calling in. I appreciate it. I hope to meet you personally sometime, and I hope we can do this again.
Well, I'd love to. That'd be fine.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
If I might just begin to comment, one of the things that was very eloquently just mentioned is that that our military is involved in terrorism all the time. And in 2000, we spent $343 billion on our military budget. That's 69% greater than the 5 nations whose military budgets comes next to ours. And that is a tremendous budget. And some of that money was being funneled directly into the Taliban's pocket. I've heard 57 million as a statistic several times. And so we must realize that, that of course, as has been said, there is no justification for terrorism, but that we must come closer to understanding how to make this world a world free of terrorism, which means free from American terrorism as well.
That's true. I mean, the facts are out there, as Michael Albert said, and actually from his website, from zmag.org, there are 3 pages of like specific involvement, U.S. involvement in the Middle East, that each one you sit and you wonder, you know, U.S. troops land in Lebanon to preserve stability in 1958. Why are we there, you know? And you read all of these things, there's at least 50 of them, and you wonder, what's our involvement? And you know, the interests are, you know, moneyed interests in a lot of cases, and you know, we need to examine the reasons why the U.S. is actually in the Middle East and what we've been doing there.
One of the really right things that Martin Luther King once said is that that you can never forget that everything Hitler did in Germany was legal. And that applies to America as well. It's important never to assume that what America does under its law system is legal, or no, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that, is righteous or justifiable. And that, you know, we have to move away from the political agendas of the politicians who are united because that is politically very advantageous. The media is one-sided, and so are the politicians, and so, of course, that agenda is very clearly set already.
I'd just like to make a quick plug. I think that we've got a lot of work ahead of us to counteract the message of the Bush administration and make the voice of peace a much stronger one. And I'd like to encourage the folks out there in TV land, in Somerville, to get involved in the work of our coalition, CP PACs and the student groups. We're part of a very strong and very lively and very much growing coalition, and I would like to encourage folks to contact us, to contact CP PACs, to contact Peace Action and the other organizations involved in this coalition if they'd like to get involved. Our website is right on there. Our phone number in Boston is 426-3040, and again, I would encourage people to contact us, to join our efforts, to join our vigils. We're holding weekly vigils Tuesday evening in Boston, in Copley Square at 6 p.m. And we need more people to add to the diversity of voices so that we're not just speaking with one voice out of the Bush administration.
And I'd like to further encourage people to be proactive about their views. And if peace is something that you're interested in even learning more about and the perspective that, that the peace movement represents, which is in fact simply, if nothing else, you know, if you're coming at this from a conservative view, it's nothing else but a perspective to contrast a one-sided view. And so I encourage everyone on October 7th to attend Government Center at 1 p.m., which is a national day for peace and solidarity, which is is a day of action all over America, in all campuses. And
excellent.
It's important to realize that this is not a small localized movement, and that nationally there are students and activists speaking out about this everywhere. And the more pressure citizens put upon our press and our government to activate and to come out and oppose the majority at this point, the more we can get done as a culture and a society in moving to a world of peace.
Very interesting. We're going to take another short break now. We have another tape from Noam Chomsky, and in this tape he discusses foreign aid. So let's go to that.
Could you discuss just the use of the aid?
Well, first of all, the facts are worth knowing. Actually, there was a study done at the University of Massachusetts on public awareness of campaign issues. And one of the questions they asked people, what do you think is the biggest item on the federal budget? Well, it's military by a long shot. Very few people said that. What they picked was aid. Most people think that foreign aid is the biggest item on the federal budget. In fact, it's undetectable. The United States is one of the lowest countries among the OECD, the rich industrial countries. The United States is one of the lowest in foreign aid. And what's called foreign aid is in fact is mostly a kind of export promotion. So aid means, in fact, that's why the aid does not go primarily to the poorer, the needier countries, because they're not good consumers. If you look at the way the aid works, it's basically aid from the U.S. taxpayer to U.S. businesses, which enable the businesses to sell to the countries on money that the U.S. taxpayer gives them. It's a very small amount, I should say, but what there is turns out substantially to be export promotion, and in a realistic sense, it doesn't leave the country. It goes from one pocket into another pocket, from the pocket of taxpayers into the pockets of the exporters. Now, sometimes the population that receives it benefits, sometimes not. Often it's harmful to them because of the way it's selected. Well, if you look at the very small amount of what we call aid, which is mostly not aid, the biggest chunk of it by far goes to two Middle East countries, Israel and Egypt, which get roughly the same amount, except remember Egypt has 10 times the population, so it means Israel gets much more per capita. And Israel per capita gets aid beyond. It's just off the chart. There's nothing like it in world affairs. Egypt gets a lot, and then Turkey is the next recipient, all Middle East countries. And then another new block of aid that's picking up now, so-called aid, is Russia and parts of Eastern Europe. The aid to the Middle East is for different reasons. I mean, that's basically designed to ensure U.S. control over the oil production of the region. Israel and Egypt and Turkey are kind of regarded as sort of guardians of the wealthy. The way we run the oil system is there's a lot of potential wealth in the Middle East, and we have to make sure, as the British did before us, that wealth does not go to the people of the region, but that it comes to the West. And the way that's handled is by having family dictatorships, which run the oil production and invest their money and their profits in the U.S. Treasury bonds and Kuwaiti investment firm in London and so on. And they got to be protected from their populations who don't really understand why. The population of the region, many people, is not persuaded by the logic that says the wealth of their region has to come to the West, not to, well, they're impoverished. So you need sort of protectors. And Israel and Turkey and Pakistan and Iran, when it was under the Shah, are kind of these protectors. We got to support them.
Well, welcome back to the studio, and I want to thank our guests this evening, Eric Weltman to my left, Valerie Costa next to him, and Josh Feldman. And we have 6 or 7 minutes left for the show, so I'd like to have our final questions. And one that was given to me was, we all agree it was a very terrible thing that happened on the 11th, unnecessary loss of life. But no one discusses, as it was put to me, and it's kind of like infotainment or product-based. CNN calling it a new war and using this cap and name for everything that runs on television on their channels these days. No one discusses how good this crisis is for other industries and suppliers, like newspapers, flag manufacturing, raising costs and not giving them away as an example. And do you have some observations about that, what you see going on around you?
I'll just mention it's a sort of a funny irony. I gather that many, if not most, of these American flags that you see waving around are actually made in China. Yeah. So I just think that's
the New York Times had a picture right after September 11th, a few days afterwards, with a picture of Chinese workers in a factory making these American flags, and the caption underneath is something to the effect of Chinese workers manning the machines 24 hours a day, non-stop, to mass produce these flags, and you know that they're not getting fair wages for that, and that's I guaranteed. I'll bet my life on that one. But
I mean, I think Josh raised earlier the idea of the figures of military spending, and I think that's. I mean, we already spend 50% of the federal budget on the military, and my understanding or my concern is that Congress is basically handing over a blank check to the military. And again, I think that's more reason for our congressional leaders to be speaking up and saying we have other priorities, other needs, affordable housing, public housing, education, health care. Hundreds of thousands of Americans are uninsured. This is not a point where we should be giving a blank check to the military. I think, if anything, that the tragic events of the 11th point out the fallacy of a so-called national missile defense system. I mean, to put it bluntly, lasers in space would not have done anything to protect us from that horrible tragedy. So I think there's all the more reason to be very skeptical of the call for more military funding, and all the more reason for our congressional leaders to be speaking out against more military funding and saying we have human needs here at home and we have better ways to protect ourselves, reforming our foreign policy, working through the United Nations, addressing the concerns, the root causes of terrorism, poverty, despair, repression. I mean, those are real defenses. A real defense against terrorism is getting at its root causes, not throwing billions at the military.
And in addition, similar to the Gulf War, we are in a censored media situation. So we're not even getting the information in the name of defense that is crucial to us creating an educated opinion about this conflict. So that's another area that we must put pressure upon, is the mainstream media. And we need to write editorials, and we need people to make their voices heard. And that will also help to change public opinion.
Well, I hope we can follow up on some of these questions. The next one we won't be able to get into because we're going to be leaving the show. But underlying the kind of problems we have in the world that are confronting us now are these believers. And that is, where does theological purity on this level come from? We've got a problem in that there are people that want us to believe in what they believe in. And we're going to cover that in another show, I hope, at some future time. I want to thank you all very much for